When someone says that music is dissonant, what do they mean? They could mean something very specific, but there's a wide variety of things that really could mean. Different people could even disagree on what is or what is not dissonant. Let's try to untangle things a bit. Hey, I'm Michael. I have a doctorate in composition, and I taught music theory as an adjunct professor for 6 years. I recently thought back to something Ramin said about dissonance in our review of Sarah McLachlan's album, Fumbling Towards Ecstasy, and I want to unpack that and discuss it a little bit. First off, I need to be clear. Ramin did not say anything wrong. It's just something that he said that really made me think. So when we're talking about dissonance, we should start with a definition. From the Alfred Essential Dictionary of Music, dissonance is two or more notes that, when played together, cause tension or require resolution. Side note, this book is so old and like crusty. I've spilled things on it so many times. It was required for my freshman year of undergrad in 2003. Yeah, 2003. This thing has seen better days. Anyway, so two notes that when played together cause tension or require resolution. The first part of that I really want to unpack is two notes. Dissonance is relational. Other things that I want to focus on in this video: dissonance is on a continuum. Dissonance is necessary. Dissonance is subjective. Dissonance is contextual. Dissonance is relational. It depends on how two or more pitches relate to each other. Dissonance needs to be resolved if we're thinking in typical Western tonal theory. In order to think through the classical music way of thinking about dissonance, and this is definitely from a first semester theory view of things. There's a lot more to it than this, but this is just a quick primer. Let's go through an old handout that I made when I started teaching. For all of these exercises, we're going to think about how the pitches relate to the C major triad, C, E, G. Anything that is not C, E, or G is technically a dissonance in this exercise. So the first type of dissonance that I want to talk about is a passing tone. It's a note that forms a stepwise connection between two stable tones. So here, it's our C major triad. That C on top is in the chord. We can have a passing tone of that D. That D is a passing tone. It also works stepping down. We could have a chromatic passing tone. In this case, we're going to work on two different chords, C and G. So here we're going from this C in the melody to D in the melody, which is the part of the G major chord, G, B, D. We could have a chromatic passing tone between these two notes of C sharp, or we could do the same process backwards, going from E to D, using that E flat as a potential chromatic passing tone. Something that's a little bit harder to understand if you don't yet have a strong grasp on meter, there is such a thing as an accented passing tone. It works the same way as other passing tones that we've talked about, but if we take meter into account, it occurs in a strong metric position. So 1, 2, 3, 4, that's our beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Coming out at a stronger point in the meter. Same thing works backwards. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. So those are all of the types of passing tones that are relevant here. Now let's move on to neighbor tones. Neighbor tones are a tone that moves by step to a non-harmonic tone and then back by step in the opposite direction to the original stable tone. We can have an upper neighbor, or we could have a lower neighbor. Just like with passing tones, if they happen in a strong metric position, they are accented. Same thing can happen with neighbor tones. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. There are such things as incomplete neighbors. These are neighbor tones that are connected in one direction to a stable tone, but they don't resolve to the same tone. So this first example that I'm showing on screen here has two possible incomplete neighbor resolutions. We could have, so in this first example, we expect E, F, E, but instead we leap down to the next stable tone. That's an incomplete neighbor. The other possible incomplete neighbor in this example is this. We can do the same thing going up. Incomplete neighbors this way, or this way. And in the same way, we could have an accented incomplete neighbor. So in this case, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Same thing in the opposite direction. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. With all of these accented versus not accented versions of all of these chords, it can be a little hard to hear what the purpose of differentiating them is when I'm playing them just like this on a keyboard. They're much easier to hear in the situation of a piece of music. I encourage you to look for them and let me know if you find any. Accented incomplete neighbors sometimes have other terms that people use for them, like escape tone. That's when you take a step into a dissonance and then you leap in the opposite direction to a consonant pitch. So in this first example, so we're stepping into dissonance and then leaping in the opposite direction to consonance. Probably more important is the appoggiatura. That's when you leap into the dissonance and then step down into the consonants. That is really common throughout especially the capital C classical era of Western classical music. So one more thing we can do with neighbors, and that's the double neighbor. Or we have a neighbor on either side of our goal tone. Those are just the main types of things. There are many other types of non-harmonic tones that we have in classical music. These are the common ones that you'll see in the big C classical era, which is what most of Western classical music theory is based on. Everything that's beyond that sort of needs additional rules that came later in history. And so with each of these, one of the important things to notice is that the dissonance involves a sense of motion, a desire for motion. We hear that note that doesn't want to be there, and we want it to resolve somewhere. Through this, we can really see how dissonance is relational. It requires at least one other pitch to be dissonant to. You can't just be dissonant by yourself, you need to be dissonant against something. And this dissonance, as I said, typically wants to resolve to a consonant tone. There's a gradation of dissonance. Something can be more dissonant or less dissonant than another dissonance. This is not an exact science, but this is how I see it. Let's start by working just in C major, because that's the easiest. And we're going to start by going with intervals up from tonic. So C up to something else. We've got major second, major third, perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, perfect octave. Just that far. There's also the perfect unison, if we have two pitches that are the exact same. That is actually the most consonant. There's no dissonance with this. We just got this one steady pitch. The next most consonant is the perfect octave. Doesn't feel like there's any strife. We don't feel like it needs to take us anywhere. But then we get to technically a slight amount of dissonance, but very, very little in the perfect fifth. Especially when you pair that with the octave. It's a little hollow maybe, but it's very stable. We don't necessarily feel like it needs to go anywhere. The next most stable interval is the major third. Especially, again, when paired with the fifth and the octave. That's our tonic triad. It feels like home, feels like we don't necessarily need to go anywhere. There's no tension held here. There technically is a very little bit, because it's not a unison. Unison is the least tension. But that's enough tension for us to live with. Now, the next most consonant interval is up for debate a little bit. I would posit that it's actually the major sixth. We do still want it to go here, but it doesn't sound unpleasant in any way. There's not a lot of rub. Then we've got the one that is a little bit hard to explain. The perfect fourth is sometimes consonant, sometimes dissonant. When the tonic of any key is the lower note, in this case C and F, that means that this fourth is technically dissonant because it really wants to fall to there. That's a little bit hard to hear because it doesn't sound too dissonant to our ears, but it is technically dissonant. But there's a little bit of a caveat in that, which I'll get to. Next, moving further into dissonance, we've got the major second. There's definite dissonance there. We can do the same process moving down instead. So we will add to our list minor second, minor third, another perfect fourth, another perfect fifth, minor sixth, minor seventh, and another perfect octave. In this case, the minor third has about as much consonance as the major third. They're basically equal. They are somewhat steady. The perfect fourth with the tonic pitch on the top is consonant, not dissonant. We don't need to resolve this one like we need to resolve this one. And just like the major third and minor third are in roughly the same stature, the sixths are roughly the same. The major sixth and the minor sixth are similar amounts of dissonance, which is not much at all. Then we can do the same thing with the sevenths and seconds. The major second and the minor seventh are roughly as dissonant as each other, and the minor second and the major seventh are both more dissonant than their counterparts. This major third has roughly the same amount of consonance as this major third and this major third. Similarly, this minor third is just about as consonant as this minor third and this minor third, for example. All of the intervals between any two white keys within the key of C major has been talked about, except for one. The tritone, the augmented fourth, or the diminished fifth. This is the most dissonant sound of these intervals that we can create. But it's a very important dissonant. As I talked about in another video, this is the key-defining tritone. If you can find the tritone in a key of music that exists naturally, you can find what major key it relies to. So I specified major there. What about minor keys? Minor keys have all of the same intervals as the major key, but they're in different spots. But that's only with the natural minor. The tendencies are the same, but they're in different spots. When we get to harmonic minor, we might see something like the augmented second. technically this is dissonant. This is more dissonant than a minor second, technically. But taken out of the context of a piece of music, this is the same thing as a minor third. So in that case, we can just count it as a minor third and we're ignoring it for this exercise. But again, the perfect fourth is highly contextual in certain styles, whether that is a consonant interval or a dissonant interval. If someone ever complains about dissonance in music, for starters, let them be, that's fine. They're entitled to their opinion. But considering the gradation of dissonance, something completely devoid of dissonance would be just a single pitch. This might be useful for meditation, but it's hard to think of this as music. This is potentially calming and soothing. We need a little bit of dissonance to push us to something. We need a story to tell with the music. We need some dissonance in order to tell the story of music. Now, different people like different amounts of dissonance, and that's great. I'm glad that there are lots of different ways of looking at things, but we need some. Dissonance is necessary. Like I said, different people like different amounts of dissonance. If we played current day pop music for, say, Mozart, he would probably think it was incredibly dissonant and cacophonous. If we played him Charlie XCX, he'd probably die. Similarly, some of the music that I really love, that I listen to, sounds like noise to other people. For example, when I was a kid, my most common babysitter was my great aunt, whom I affectionately referred to as Auntie D. I would hang out in the basement at Auntie D's house, sometimes with my friends who lived nearby, and we would often be listening to music. I remember pretty common if we'd be listening to Tori Amos, she would come to the top of the stairs and say, "Who's that belly aching down there?" Some people think things are dissonant and unpleasant when other people like them. And some music is too dissonant for even me. Like, I like a lot of stuff that has some crunchy chords in it. I'm a composer. I like a lot of what current people are doing in music, but sometimes it goes too far for my tastes, and that's great. If you like it more than I do, I appreciate that, and I'm glad that there's music out there for you that's not for me. So this takes me back to Ramin's comment on the dissonance in that Sarah McLachlan song. I was taken aback not because he was wrong, he pointed out something that I didn't think of it that way.
I really love the texture of this song, her use of dissonance and the harmonies again, the way she mixes those elements and more together to create what might be the darkest song on the album, actually.
When I think of dissonance, I think of like really obvious dissonance, but that's not to say that there isn't any dissonance. I don't know specifically what Ramin was latching on to. Him pointing out dissonance in this song really made me think about, what is dissonance? How do I feel about dissonance? And hence this video. We talked about how in classical music, the perfect fourth is consonant in some cases and dissonant in others. It's consonant basically everywhere as long as it is not a perfect fourth above the tonic. So that perfect fourth, consonant. But this one is dissonant, wants to resolve down. Similar to what I was saying about how Mozart would likely find pop music dissonant, dissonance is contextual, just like the perfect fourth is contextual on whether it is dissonant or not. Different amounts of dissonance make sense in different music styles. I mean no disrespect to either musician that I'm about to talk about. I like both very much, but if Taylor Swift used the kind of dissonances that Stravinsky does in The Rite of Spring, it would be very out of place. For instance, there's a very important chord in The Rite of Spring. That would make no sense if it were anywhere in a Taylor Swift song. But on the other side of that coin, if at some point in The Rite of Spring there were a section that had a simple melody and a 3 or 4 chord loop, that would sound really out of place too. In either case, the sounds could be intentionally out of place, either in the Taylor Swift song or the Stravinsky piece of music, but we need the context of what's happening around it to know what dissonance is appropriate and what is inappropriate. It's beyond even to each their own. It's what makes sense in the context and what you're trying to say with dissonance. So I encourage you all to experiment with how you listen to dissonance and how you create dissonance yourself. Similarly to dissonance in writing a story, if nothing bad ever happens, it's really not much of a story. We need the bad things to happen. There needs to be some tension that we can resolve. Similarly with dissonant sounds, we want them to resolve to be pleasant. Now, in some music like The Rite of Spring, the resolution doesn't happen the same way. This chord doesn't resolve. In fact, it's just repeated a lot. Resolution is more or less important in different styles of music. In most of the stuff that most of us listen to on the regular, dissonance is resolved. Experiment with that. Try and find out things where dissonance is not resolved in tonal music. I think that's always really interesting. Why do you think the songwriter or composer did not resolve that dissonance? Let me know what you think about any of this stuff. As we're ending the video now, give this video a like if you liked it. Give it a pity like if you didn't like it. It's not gonna hurt you. Up here is a video that YouTube thinks you might like. Down here is a playlist of other music theory videos. Check all that out. Subscribe, do all the usual stuff, and as usual, maintain your groovy selves.